local governments. These are required to integrate cross-cutting issues when it comes to respective plans and budgets, for which gender and disability are key components of promoting social protection inclusion in Uganda. Now, we do have the Uganda Debt Network undertaking a study and generating evidence on gender-sensitive and disability-inclusive social protection systems in Uganda. A report was produced with the results and advancing recommendations. NTV broadens this discussion on the status of gender-sensitive and disability-inclusive social protection systems in Uganda. We are joined by board member, Uganda Debt Network, Mr. Walter Akwat. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Walter Akwat.
Good afternoon to you. Thank you for hosting us.
It's a pleasure. So we want to first understand what's the status in Uganda when we talk about social disability.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me just give a context. In 2015, Uganda enacted a policy or formulated a policy on social protection. And I think this policy provides a wide range of issues, but most importantly, it is geared towards providing avenues to of us managing the shocks from vulnerabilities and all that. And also I have to mention something that that many people already know. In Uganda, about 23% of the population are still clustered to be living below the poverty line. Mm-hmm. And of this, again, another statistics that about 16% of the population in Uganda have got some form of disability. Now, if you only look at the medical form of, or the medical definition of disability, you probably might not realize the gravity of this situation. So, the research that Uganda Debt Network did is basically for us to study and understand the gaps that are existing. I want to first of all commend that government has actually done a lot towards creating platforms for of social protection geared towards improving the livelihoods of especially the people who are most affected normally. Women are most disproportionately affected by this, as well as people with disability. And there are so many programs that government has come up with. You already know some of them. For instance, if I could just talk about the Senior Citizens Grant, or say just most of us want to call it. Mm. It's targeting mainly the population that's above 80 years old. Our study basically is to look at this project or grant and see how does it actually address the issues that we're looking at, the gender inclusiveness as well as the disability. For instance, if you just like I mentioned, the projects, the grant targets people above 80 years old. Mm-hmm. It does not exclude whether you're talking about men, women, or it just looks at all of them at a general. But we all know from the communities that we come from that actually the situation is not that equitable. The situation between men and women, regardless of their age, is far different from what just general view. You will find in a situation where most of the this grant is that the beneficiaries, especially the women who are above 8, the burden on them is far, far higher than the burden on some of the men.
So when we look at gender and disability being key components, how are these supposed to be used in the promotion of social protection inclusion?
Yes, so basically what we're trying to look at is we're looking at measures that should be brought up. First of all, to identify these gaps, that actually these gaps are existing, but also create very intentional measures to plug these gaps, to know that, for instance, beyond granting, providing a grant for people above 8, I'm just giving that as an example, can we also allocate some additional that will go especially to the more vulnerable groups, like women. And then the other thing we also have to mention, sometimes when we're talking about social protection, we're only looking at the role of government and all that. But ourselves, as citizens, for instance, we must be candid enough to also view ourselves and see what is our role. We all have a role towards improving social protection.
Speaking of roles, I know that Uganda Debt Network is currently holding a workshop. Well, what are the objectives of this workshop and what is the expected outcome?
The workshop had quite a number of objectives, but I just want to focus first of all on the frameworks, the legal frameworks available. We wanted to analyze the frameworks or the policies that are available to, for social protection. And like I mentioned, we have this 2015 social protection policy that was formulated by the government. We want to see how viable is it still, given the context that we are in. The population has increased. If you look at the various statistics, for instance, what is our... if you look at the various statistics that I want to... For instance, what is the mortality issues on this country? At what age are the people now dying? Previously we were looking at 15. Maybe the situation has kind of improved to about 60 something. So there are various facets that we're trying to consider, and one of the objectives was definitely to look at these frameworks available and see how can it be improved.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Akwat.